The spectacle unfolding before you adds up to one of the great traditional occasions of the English summer, Henley Royal Regatta. For more than 150 years now, grown men, cunningly disguised as schoolboys, have been going about their solemn, watery business.
Now that's one Henley. This is another. The world of the trippers, the pleasure boats, the punters. Another world.
Hijinks on the river, wheeler dealing in hospitality tents.
Now, whatever we may think of them, we've got a pretty good idea what they think of us. Not much, as it happens.
It's the only regatta in the world, as far as I know, which actually has pleasure boats moving backwards and forwards, up and down all the time. Not on the course, but beside the course. The argument is, which is true, I suppose, really, they have just as much right to enjoy themselves on the river as we do. But it is reaching a saturation point.
Head coming, skiff! Keep to the right, skiff!
Sooner or later there'll probably be an accident and someone will get run down, and then something will be done about it.
There's that green encampment. Do you think somebody's been sold that as a very cheap hospitality?
Almost certainly. You see that in a Mediterranean fruit market, wouldn't you? Really? I mean, this is all the regatta land.
No, of course it's not. It's up at Thames's, that strip.
Oh, I see.
You wouldn't have any of this. You think we would have fresh donuts being sold? Very upmarket. Shamrock coaches, how elegant on the Henley.
But now, what about all this? What about the enclosure down at the bottom here, by these yellow affairs? With
The year I cease being chairman, I'm going to go out with a flippers and a wetsuit, and an axe and a saw, and a few things of detonators and a few things of explosives, and lower the whole bloody lot the night before the regatta. If they arrest me, I'll say I went mad.
Apart from Gilbert and Sullivan, what exactly does go on here? A sporting occasion or just a she social jamboree? Do people come here to see or be seen?
This is one of the, you know, the last of our really traditional English customs.
I love it. I love it. I think it's really nice. I love seeing people all dressed up.
It's a big English garden party, really, isn't it?
Love it. It's a wonderful atmosphere, yes, yes. I actually like seeing a bit of rowing, too, occasionally.
The twitterings of the spotted warblers on the bank reinforce the usual caricature of Henley. But a caricature's an exaggeration of the truth. After all, this is the world's most famous regatta, copied in Australia, America, Canada, China and Japan, where it's affectionately known as Henry. Behind the clatter of cliché and the draining of glasses, what's the real truth? What's the substance of the caricature? A canvas to you and me is a matter of a few feet, almost as close as a race can be. And this is for the Princess Elizabeth Cup, the great Henley Prize for schools. Hampton from Middlesex on the Bucks station, which some people say is really in Oxfordshire, against on the Berkshire side, Shiplake College from just down the road. The longest straight reach of the Upper Thames, at the start an 18th century temple for which the regatta makes a payment of 2 eggs a year. Then a glorious 1 mile, 550 yards, an eccentric distance born of tradition. This unique straightness was why, in 1829, the first Oxford-Cambridge boat race was held here. And memories of that inspired this, the world's first major regatta. The course finishes short of Henley Bridge and just before it, rowing's senior and most exclusive club, Leander, a sort of MCC with water. When did all this begin? Well, that was in 1839, with young Victoria new on the throne and the whole country Pickwick crazy.
Why did it begin? Well, in the beginning, it had precious little to do with sport or the good of rowing. It was to do with money. The Henley Regatta was instituted in the hope of drumming up a bit of business for the local tradesmen and hoteliers. 6 stewards, 14 committeemen, and not an oarsman among the lot of them.
If one man should get the praise or blame, well, he is James Nash, who daydreamed the whole affair up while walking the riverbank. Today, 14 trophies are at stake, most famously to you and me, the diamonds for single scullers and the huge Grand Challenge Cup for 8s. But for the amateurs back in 1839, there were only 2, the Grand even then, and a Town Cup for 4s. The Grand, light-heartedly remembered in 1989, was won by Trinity College, Cambridge. They rowed 50 miles here, won the cup, and then rowed another 70 miles to London. The umpire was wiser, he rowed a horse. And one of the 4s boats was got at. No wonder the senior club agreed only to umpire.
Leander thought it was a little bit above that sort of thing. Did, though, send a 4 just to monitor progress and rowed alongside each and every race to show how superior our crews were.
The tradition of fireworks maintained to this day began. 8,000 people watched. And so on a single afternoon was born a Victorian idyll, an Edwardian delight. At first, the infant regatta struggled. Patronage from Prince Albert, a notorious non-sportsman whose own idea of exercise was brushing his whiskers, helped a bit. And by the 1880s, Henley Royal Regatta had become something rather special. The new railway brought the crowds, Houseboats and launches line the course, picnics and parasols, cream teas and claret, dresses that put you in mind of Ascot. For the well-to-do, the social world grew ever more exciting. So did trade for the gypsies, for the fortune-tellers, for the minstrels. But so also, now the townies had finally given way to the rowing diehards, so did the racing. Sport for the fun of it, going on till you dropped. This was amateur sport at its dotty best.
Right from the start, questions were raised which Henley would have to answer. For instance, who was this whole thing for? Was it for the people who ran it, the people who competed, or the people who watched it? And another thing, was it all supposed to be a nice, quiet, genteel affair for well-heeled young gentlemen from Oxford, Cambridge and the South? Or could anybody play?
Number 5, Leander.
Well, to take the earlier question first, those who did the rowing soon scored a couple of points over the warriors in the armchairs. Today, the draw's performed with due ceremony in the town hall, and give or take a few grumbles about not enough seating and so on, it's accepted to most people's satisfaction, like the daily order of racing. In the old days, though, that programme seemed designed more with an eye to lady guests who'd overslept. So the competitors revolted, and they won. The stewards had to scrap their programme and accept the oarsmen's. The ringleader was Walter Guts Woodgate, who must have been a real pain in the stewards' backsides, because 2 years later, in 1868, came the strange case of the coxed fours. Woodgate objected to his Brasenose College crew having a cox. He could steer with his feet from number 3, he said. Well, the stewards insisted.
But directly the race started, the Brasenose cox abandoned ship. It was nearly drowned, strangled by water lilies. Brasenose were disqualified, but coxless fours became the order of the day here for nearly 100 years.
What's Danny Boy got to do with it? Only that Fred Weatherly, the cox, survived to write it. Being an eminent lawyer, he had a lot of time for music, which helps answer that second question. Could anyone compete? Well, no. Consider those other early stars, like Kazza Major, whose early death scared people into thinking rowing might be dangerous, and Guy Nichols, who won 22 trophies and on the less successful day crashed into the Royal Launch. These chaps were all well-to-do varsity types. If you weren't one of them, you were unlikely to be at Henley. If you were a professional, or eventually even coached by one, you were out. In 1879, the Regatta followed the trend in rowing by banning anyone
who has been by trade or employment a mechanic, artisan or labourer.
And if you were a foreigner, that was really disgraceful.
Are you ready? Go!
Today, Henley seeks foreign entries, but in the old days, it's suspected that if you were foreign, you were professional. You had to be vouched for by people like British consuls. Well, some foreigners were professionals, and others didn't row or behave like Henley chaps should. Like those French-Canadian lumberjacks who came over in 1878.
Their rowing was execrable, and they did not receive the plaudits bestowed on them with that becoming modesty generally inseparable from true merit. Bell's life.
Cornell from the States. In 1881, one of their 4 planned to go crooked for a bet. 4 years later, their 8 went off, Leander's didn't, and Cornell didn't even offer to start again.
The delusion is common among Americans that the main object of rowing is to win a prize. Pearson's Weekly.
The Vesper Club from Philadelphia. 1 year suspected of being professionals, the next, Henley wouldn't even have them.
We should ban all American crews. W.A.L. Fletcher, Regatta Steward.
Our biggest prize was the Grand, and the foreigners had their beady eyes on it. Pennsylvania only just lost to Leander in the final of 1901. That was when the pro coaches were banned, but Henley still worried. The race had assumed international prestige.
Restrict Henley to the UK. Dr. War, headmaster of Eton.
The Belgians from Ghent had arrived too. suspenders on socks and cigars in mouths when they turned up for practice. Customs our chaps weren't quite ready for. And they had the audacity first to reach the grand final and then to win it, twice running. In 1908, Henley banned all foreign entries, including the Belgian champions, because the Olympics would soon be held there.
Britannia rules the waves at Henley, but only because Henley won't waive the rules. New York Times.
The crux of the matter was this. To the Victorians and the Edwardians, sports like rowing, all pulling together, rather like playing a straight bat, they were part of the British character, virtues which had helped make us the richest society in the world. The Garden Party, which had never seen itself as international anyway, didn't like the idea of seeing its guests sullied or beaten by aliens with professional advantages, or who didn't really grasp our ideas about fair play. Sport and snobbery had somehow got all mixed up with nationalism and fears of foreign invasion.
And then 1914. On one day in the Grand, Americans, Canadians and Germans all beat British crews. In this all-American final, the cup went to Harvard. The diamonds went to Italy.
In loving memory of British rowing, which passed away at Henley on July the 4th, notice in the Times.
The suffragettes were threatening the boat tents. The houseboats, and therefore the regatta's income, were dropping away. War was threatening. Everything seemed to be going to pot, and every pot seemed to be going to the devil.
Bless this regatta, that all who take part in it by competing, by organising, by launching.
Henley's been praying for itself for many years now. All the same, democratic change was a long time coming after the First World War. Slumps, depressions, not at Henley there weren't. In the 20s and 30s, the new home movie cameras preserved images of affluence and leisure. And so did the newsreels.
The lights of Henley on a warm summer's day. Youth, sun, frivolity, beauty, and sheer hard work.
Amid all this indulgence, even Jack Kelly, father of Princess Grace, fell victim to the manual labour clause. His entry was refused, he said, because of a deplorable secret from his past. He'd once been an apprentice bricklayer. Henley said it was partly because his club, Vespa, was still on the blacklist. After all, he'd only been on it 14 years. If Kelly was a villain, where were the heroes? Jack Beresford was a hero. His career spanned 20 years. He won 10 Henley trophies. And Beresford, let's forget his Polish father, shall we? Beresford was British-born, the sort of chap who, when his opponent hit the booms in the diamonds, stopped, waited, and got beaten. In the 1920 Olympics, he lost to guess who? Jack Kelly, the amateur who wasn't pure enough for Henley. And in 1939, Beresford, at 41 and southward, conceded age and weight to two Italians and gave Henley an historic finish. A dead heat, said a Woodhouseian lady in the best seats. How boring. But that year, Henley's centenary was a visitor's bonanza. In the Grand, Harvard again won an All-American final. In the Diamonds, another American, Joe Burke, was setting new standards. This time he reduced a pole almost to exhaustion. The previous year, he'd broken the record and beaten Britain's Len Habits literally out of sight.
And no one ever beat me. But I knew when I went out to the final that I was going to get a bloody good hiding. My coach had told me that. He never practiced the course, but in the actual race, he never dropped below 40. He was like a little clockwork motor, and he kept going. Very nice American, and I felt no anger at him beating me.
Antagonism to foreigners was a thing of the past. In fact, now, jingoism occasionally battled with naivety in keeping politics out of sport. Dr. Butch, you're a German, and after your time, Germans gave Nazi salutes here. When you rode around 32, 34, did you feel welcome, or did they only applaud the Brits?
No, everybody. You felt at home, you see, here, and they were all nice, as you were British or if you're German, people was nice to everybody here. They were accepted with open arms.
The centenary regatta ended in an orgy of patriotism. Then World War II. The men of Henley, always big on nostalgia, wallowed in it again amid the greater tragedy. So did the future poet laureate.
When shall I see the Thames again, the proud promoted gems again, as beefy ats without their hats come shooting through the bridge, and cheerio and cheery by across the waste of waters die, and lo, the mists of evening lie, and lightly skims the midge.
When Sir John Benjamin's questions were answered, Henley began, occasionally reluctantly, to reflect post-war attitudes. The manual labour clause had been rescinded only just before the war, but now, as doors cracked open in gentlemen's clubs, as cricket abandoned gents versus players, as British blacks were allowed to win British boxing titles, so Henley's cast changed and grew, including those cads and bounders, the mechanics, artisans and labourers.
Soon, clubs like Leander, whose emblem's a hippopotamus, they say, because a hippo walks with his nose in the air, soon the Leanders were meeting clubs like Thames Tradesmen, Metropolitan Police, and later Tideway Scullers, formed by Lou Barry, a coach who'd actually sculled for money.
You're falling now! Sit back! Sit back!
Other reforms would soon arrive, not just club crews, but composite crews. Eventually, whisper the thought and call them what you will, national crews. And already there were more overseas challenges. For one, Jack Kelly Jr., son of the outlawed father, whose insult he now set out to erase. Even the son wasn't everyone's cup of tea. That wasn't Sister Grace's fault. It was those sides of American beef he brought over and showed off when we were all still on rations. Young Kelly may not have been cut out for the diplomatic service, but he did win the diamonds twice. Then in 1954, in the deep freeze of the Cold War, over came the Russians. Henley's young blade struck a brave blow for the old country, though. They threw firecrackers into their lodgings. Later years did bring a few problems, not least a veiled ultimatum to Henley to ban South Africa or else, to which the stewards acceded. But in general, the camaraderie worked wonders. In practice, they looked formidable. In competition, nearest the camera here, they were fabulous. In their first year, they'd won the Grand and more besides. In 10 years, they won 5 Grands and 10 other trophies. And Henley would never be quite the same. This was highly sophisticated national squad stuff, a state of the art the Henley amateurs weren't familiar with, but which they'd now need to emulate. The newsreels grew excited and schoolmasterly in lecturing to us poor folks at home.
By 1/3 of a length, the Russian Navy retained the cup. Their time, 6 minutes, 40 seconds. Faster by 3 seconds than last year. British 8s must pull their socks up.
And what about Britain's scullers? From the diamonds inevitably came the personalities, all foreign.
The Russian Ivanov, and will Henley ever forget or forgive him, Stuart Sam Mackenzie of Australia.
Back in the 50s and 60s, Mackenzie, the man in white, won 6 diamonds in a row. But that wasn't all. He set out to break down rowing's establishment, and the establishment didn't much like it.
This was not cricket, old chap.
Well, what was not cricket about your VA? What were they complaining about?
Well, you see, it's a match race event here. It's man on man. I think you're setting out to psychologically beat a person before you actually start. I think that's only fair. I suppose on the water I use the rules to the full extent, quite often washed the opposition and pushed them onto the booms, downgrading the opposition when I think about it, but you're really playing to the spectators a lot of the time, and you do these things like you paddle along and then put a mad sprint on, or just to show you've probably got something in reserve or what have you. But
And what about the psychological warfare off the water? What was it you did that enraged so many people?
I suppose lots of little things, but one of the clever ones was to squeeze a handball for the whole winter and then approach your competitor and shake hands with him. That's about what I did with Evanoff on one occasion. I bounced out of the tent and shook his hand and made out I was giving him a gentle pat on the arm and nearly knocked him over, and then just vanished off into the tent again, and he didn't see me again. I think he slept on that for 3 nights.
If you'd been around here in the mid-60s, you'd have witnessed 2 nuggets of history. First, in 1964, the Harvard crew who'd won the Grand back in 1914 rowed before us again after 50 years. Man for man, the same 8, average age 70. So perhaps despite Casa Major, rowing is good for you after all. Then in 1966, a tradition died. The fair had been part and parcel of the regatta since at least the 1920s. Now it would be banished elsewhere. The regatta was bursting at the seams. The field was needed as a car park. The tradition there now is less your candy floss, more your caviar. At picnics, which, so it's said, can cost some punters £1,000 a time, rain or shine.
I've been here for now over 20 years, and I always had the same car park.
The same car?
Same car, too. That's right. Would you like a glass of sherry or something, you chaps?
Well, that's very kind of you.
Right, quite a kind chap.
Grows by the year. 5 days now, nearly 300 races, 500,000 people, a motley, colourful throng, and the river brings out the thirst and occasionally the worst in them. Frith's Derby Day painting moved across 40 miles and 130 years.
Come on, ladies and gents, get your ozone-free hats here. Won't cost you arm and a leg, maybe a leg, but not both. How about you, sir? You got a hat?
Son of God came into the world to save you. Surrender your will to him. That's tantamount to inviting him in. And if you invite him in, he will.
Going towards the barn bar. We need a drink there.
Are you going back to school now?
Nope.
I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Down by that riverside, gonna lay my burden down. I ain't gonna study war no more.
These people daily decant themselves into areas befitting their status, a neat symbol of the British genius for class. You have your first class, your business or club class, and your economy. They used to call it steerage. The public banks, admission free, or maybe a fiver to get into the so-called Regatta Enclosure. Maybe, as one joker suggested, a tenner without the music. The people who never see the end of a race, the hoi polloi, the trippers, the slummers, the campers. an army increasing in size every year. Where are you from?
Oxford. Came yesterday. We're staying at a Swiss Farm campsite.
It seems a bit difficult to me, if you're on the public bank, to get a decent view of the rowing.
Very difficult. They put all the enclosures up so you can't get down to the river now. You can only get right down the other end.
It's getting worse now because it's all for people who can go to enclosures.
It's okay if you've got money. You can go everywhere. If you haven't, you can't.
So why do you come?
The atmosphere.
Are you ready? Go!
The public banks are the first thing the crews pass, plus those unofficial hospitality and food and booze tents, all springing up at the expense of the public view, to the considerable profit of private landowners. Further along on the opposite bank is business class, the official corporate hospitality pitch for which the regatta itself is responsible. Here, companies entertain prospective clients in marquees costing £6,000 a day, and where those clients give credence to the caricature by standing with their backs to the river and discussing Wimbledon, golf, business, and each other.
So what are you doing with Cooper Industries then?
Not very much.
Are you involved in it?
This sort of thing, dating from 1976, brings a regatta about £130,000 a year. But that's peanuts to what accrues from the other bank. Over there comes a point where the scene changes utterly via the second-class regatta enclosure from public to private. The Stewart's Enclosure. And here, contrary to Cole Porter, anything does not go. You can't come in unless you're a member or a member's guest. The Enclosure's a club, membership around 5,000. Its reason, money. It began back in 1919, aimed at folk who, whether they understood rowing or not, found associating with it attractive amid these civilised conditions. Each regatta cost nearly £1 million, and well over half of it comes in from the enclosure. Women were admitted as members in 1946, and that reflects some kind of progressive credit. Our senior cricket and golf clubs won't have women at any price, even today. Henley will, for £55, the annual sub. The exclusivity of the enclosure is camouflaged by its size, plus the 50,000 pims and 6,000 bottles of bubbly that annually go down. But within the castle, there's a further, even more exclusive castle, the committee lawn. Here, only the stewards, plus their guests, may tread, talk and tipple, fighting a gallant rearguard battle against encroaching modern forces.
One time this morning at 11:30, there were 6 helicopters over the island. Absolutely.
Well, this year, for the first time, we banned hand telephones in the enclosure. It's all this business of, oh, I'm a busy businessman and I want my jolly things too. And if you want to talk to your broker, bloody well stay in the office.
It's this unbending autocracy of the enclosure which maddens those who can't get into it, especially the dress rules.
One of the things that makes Henley special and that attracts people to want to come to it is the level of reasonable formality in the steward's enclosure. If people want to come and strip to the waist or open their shirt fronts, if it's a hot day, they can go in the regatta enclosure, they can go anywhere else they like.
Modest skirts, please, ladies, if you don't mind. Try showing a knee and the guards on the gate, or a sort of unofficial court of appeal within will refuse you entry. A lady mustn't have knees or thighs.
it's embarrassing if you turn up with the wrong dress, but I'm really not interested in changing the rules from year to year because rah-rah skirts or 3 inches of thigh or 1 inch or anything else happens to be the in thing this season. Thank God at Henley we do not get inflicted with this ridiculous fashion nonsense, fashion in inverted commas, that they have at Ascot, where people go around looking like cartoons of what a fashion might be, simply to draw attention to themselves.
The enclosure, as you might expect, is level with the finishing line. Beyond are the boat tents, and here, sweat and sport take over from all the chit-chat and the champers.
Henley's not all drinking, you know. It wouldn't be anything without the oarsmen. It's because it's rowing, and rowing is a unique sport. It's a class leveller.
Very much so, very much so. We take our sport very seriously. I much prefer the boat tent area, being with my crews every year. It's a different world from the social side of it, you know.
Hampton School are accustomed to sleeping and eating all week in digs which, if they weren't sanctified, you might be inclined to call a hovel. Actually, it's the church hall. This year, they've been rewarded. They've won the Princess Elizabeth Cup, that coveted prize for school eights. At moments like this, the atmosphere in the boat tents reminds you of a school speech day. But most of the time, it's where you can sense the skill, science and camaraderie of a modern sport.
Row well, you Al.
In a way, the rowing's changed more than the regatta. In its earliest days, these young fellows would have rowed wooden tubs, rather like ship's lifeboats, very likely with a college servant or 3 to help with the lifting, and gulp down a raw egg and sherry before racing, having dined the previous night on rare beef and claret. Now they train on machines, feed on pasta, veg and mineral water, and row streamlined boats moulded in plastic. But there's still one thing missing: women. Coxes, yes, but crews, no. In 1981 and 82, Henley permitted invitation races for women scullers and fours, but since then, nothing. Why?
You've chosen a good question to ask me. I think that the resistance comes from those that competed at Henley 20 or 30 years ago and not those that are competing now.
I gather that 2 ladies once tried to get in by sending entries as bird and hole. When's all this going to change?
I think we will have women at Henley, possibly within the next decade.
Meanwhile, what do the men think of this regatta? Well, for facilities and organisation, full marks. Up to 90 races some days, often 2 on the course at a time. Again, it's the steward's apparent assumption of infallibility that goads ambitious visitors.
Would you be charitable and call it eccentricity or just bloody-mindedness?
A little difficult at times. I think they're fairly stubborn, and I don't think they're sensitive enough to the necessity of creating or structuring the events so that they're truly competitive for the foreign entries.
They make their decisions at their new and resplendent headquarters beyond the boat tents and the Leander Club, and they literally hold the bridge. The 50-odd stewards are self-elected and for life. Here in session, their representatives, the Committee of Management.
Right. Item 4, membership of the Enclosure, 987 people on the waiting list.
Most of the stewards went to public school. All tend to live south of Nottingham. Almost all are rowing men. Average age inevitably high, the committee younger and reputedly more virile.
The supreme sound post on Friday.
In fairness, they don't talk about food all the time. Their Victorian predecessors once made a negative but wise decision, not to become the rulers of rowing. So today, unlike MCC, whose power in cricket waned in our hard commercial world, all they need do is run their own regatta. And they've rallied it from crisis 25 years ago to $250,000 annual profit a day. They used to be criticised for not helping British rowing, but now they give it more than £50,000 a year. Reputations stick, though. Coney has his own definition.
I think we're rather old-fashioned and rather probably a bit cussed, and there are times when I think we deliberately don't move with the times because we enjoy being different. But I think that underneath all that, we actually have quite a good idea of what is desirable for the regatta and for rowing long term, and are prepared to make changes at the appropriate time.
It does seem to the outside world that there are times when you're absolutely impervious to all criticism and even derision.
Yes, I mean, it is unfashionable these days to have people who believe they know what is best and are not subject to everybody else telling them what they ought to do. And the unique thing about the regatta is that it is still run and controlled entirely by the stewards. We have total control of it, and I'm afraid take the view that if people don't like the regatta we provide, which is the regatta we want to see, then it's no skin off our nose if they don't come.
Well, it doesn't seem as though the regatta is a very democratic institution, then.
No, it's not democratic at all. I mean, it's democratic in the sense that if the committee are doing things that the rest of the stewards don't like, the rest of the stewards have the power, and on a few occasions do tell the committee so. But in terms of the general public, no, it isn't democratic.
Do you give them a thought?
Yes. I'm very sorry that as a result of the hospitality, entertainment growth in the last 5 or 10 years, there's hardly anywhere where you can have a bit of peace and quiet to watch if you're just an ordinary member of the public. The difficulty really is that we don't control the greater part of the land alongside the course.
Well, let me return to a question I posed earlier. Is this primarily a social or a sporting event?
Yeah. House rules are that the rowing comes first, always.
They always have a slow start, though, don't they? Too near the barrier. I think they're slipping back. Slipping back.
Last year, something happened to support a sensational theory that people actually come to Henley to watch the rowing. On the final day, a beaten crew appealed. The race had to be re-rowed in late evening, even after the prize giving, and 14,000 stayed to watch. But that begs another question. How important is this regatta in the wider context of world rowing?
Oh, I think it's considered to be an important event, all right. I mean, Henley would like to say that it's the ¡1 private enterprise regatta, second only to the World Championships and the Olympic end. But the Europeans would probably say that the big regatta in Lucerne is the more important.
Well, it depends on who you are. For American colleges, it's sort of the premier prize. If you're a very good American college crew, then you get to come here and compete in Henley.
Most important event for all the schools, I think. Parents see a school doing well at Henley and say, I'd like my son to go there.
Each year, more and more people come to watch. There's no other race in the world where thousands of people come to watch rowing.
The standard at Henley is not really very high. The standard of a lot of our national team women is well above the standard of the average college crew.
I find Henley a bit of a circus, really. All these boats travelling up and down.
These are sort of the problems with the regatta, but there are also the distinctive features that make it sort of challenging. It's very, very difficult to win here.
In some ways, it really is an oddball regatta. For instance, 2 abreast and sudden death, as opposed to 6 abreast and second chances everywhere else. These multi-levels of talent, the elitism of the Grand Eights and Diamond Scullers, to the embryonic skills of schoolboys. But this is the place where all of them equally are desperate to row, and if physically possible, to win.
I think they've got back. I think Cork can come back.
I think so, yeah.
I think they have. Come on, Cork.
Yeah.
Come on, Cork.
The Thames Cup is the junior among the 3 events for men's eights. But to Cork and Clonmel at this moment, a win at Henley is akin to a world championship.
Clonmel come back. I reckon they're level, I reckon.
Yeah.
Come on. Come on. Your last 10 strokes of the regatta almost. Come on.
And so, Henley has progressed through the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s. The central character so often Steve Redgrave, Britain's Olympic gold medalist. In 1983, contesting the diamonds for the first time, he caused Tim Crooks, twice the champion, to stop, nearly exhausted. In 1986, he was a humiliated figure in the distance, beaten psychologically as much as physically by a Dane who was 3 stone lighter. In 1987, in a rerun following a collision with a canoe, he and Andy Holmes caused the Russian Pivanovs to stop. Mind you, the arrogance of their finish and the manner of their gestures caused a few raised eyebrows in the enclosure. That year, too, the Russians returned in triumph. The British weren't at full strength, but the Russians won the Grand and 3 other trophies, 4 wins from 7 entries. In 1988, you might have seen a British 8 winning the Grand by a foot. But then again, you might not have. Not in this weather. The dress rules took a hammering, but Henley survived, and so did royalty. And then came 1989, the 150th anniversary. Action as usual, plus buckets full of nostalgia as old-timers returned, remembered and compared.
In 1912, I think it was, when the suffragettes were on the go, you know. As I was coming down into the town, I saw a crew come out from one of the houses with the coxswain dressed up as a woman, and then pretended they were going to set fire to the boat tents. And of course, the police realized it was a leg pull, you see. And then they arrested her, or him at least, and took him up to the police station. Crowds of people all following up, you know, thinking it was a real thing, but of course it wasn't.
Well, I first rode here in the Eton 8 of 1920. We were allowed, the coaches were allowed to bicycle along the towpath during the races. And my God, that was absolutely marvelous.
My last appearance at Henley as a competitor was 1947. Henley, to me now, is totally different. You know, the atmosphere is different. There's too many tents, too much sponsorship, too much money.
Well, of course Henley's changed in 150 years, but only in detail. To the casual observer, the scene hasn't changed much at all.
You can ruin the town, you can alter the skyline. But once you're out on these waters, there isn't very much that the developers and the speculators and the town planners can do.
Henley always was Henley, and it still is. Are we ever likely to see radical change? Now? Soon?
Yes, I would like to see it include events for women.
A pleasure deferred, no doubt, till the stewards en masse decide it won't destroy their traditional programmes.
You can dislike aspects of this regatta, I do. But I'll tell you one thing. I have to admit that never at any sporting event have I ever seen quite so many people quite so happy. People here seem to enter into a kind of a dream. The public imitates the establishment, youngsters become Edwardians, and thousands think they're on the Mississippi. Maybe the only people playing themselves are the competitors, and contrary to general view, the men in school caps. Genuine antiques in a world of reproduction. I fancy that the regatta will continue to prosper for the very reasons it's sneered at.
And I sincerely hope not for the one implied by a certain habitué of the Enclosure bars. If Britain banned alcohol, he said, one eye on the hospitality tents, the other two on his pims, Henley would cease. But if rowing were banned, Henley would continue. The implications don't bear thinking about. Henley Royal Regatta. Like it or lump it, it's probably going to last forever.